Mikell, is it Mikell or
Mikell.
Mikell, NRCS. Gordon is a state conservation agronomist with USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service with a BS in Ag Mechanization and Business and a Master's in Ag Education from Clemson. He's a certified crop advisor. He's been working with growers since 2011 in South Carolina, Georgia, North Carolina on improving soil health and implementing covers in various cropping systems from vegetables to cotton. Producers that have improved soil health use cover crops and soil biology to reduce input costs while maintaining yields. He's also involved with training NRCS field staff in areas such as soil biology, cover crops, nutrient management, and soil erosion. And I feel bad, Drew, I don't have such a lengthy introduction.
Hey, that's all right. I work for the Department of Natural Resources in Greenville, graduated Clemson with a degree in soil and water, environmental science, and just kind of take this rainfall simulator all over the state. Looking forward to a good bit presenting it. So.
You guys take it away.
Well, thank y'all for letting us come. I work as an agronomist with our agency. We have NRCS. If you're not familiar with us, we used to be the Soil Conservation Service. We're not a regulatory agency. We're strictly voluntary through your taxpayer dollars. And our motto is help people, help the land. So, and this is I work all over the state, and we have a partnership with Department of Natural Resources and also the South Carolina Grazing Lands Coalition. They wrote a grant a couple years ago to help purchase a few of these rainfall simulators. And this is not anything. There's not anything scientific here other than the height of that water nozzle there is about. There was some calculations that went into that, and that's actually at a certain pressure delivers about the same impact as a raindrop would. So other than that, it's just a demonstration on how different land management practices affect both infiltration and runoff. And I give full credit to Drew. I'm just here to talk. He did all the heavy lifting, setting this thing up, and it is a lot involved with these pans. So what we have is we have to go out there in the field and actually cut out. It's like a cookie cutter. You turn the pan upside down, and you want to take it in situ. You want to, in other words, just like it is, you don't want to have any disturbance. We talked about turbidity in there. We don't want any kind of disturbance to the ground. So we want to mimic exactly what's happening in the field. So there's a lot of care goes into that, and just getting these things set up. So I want to thank Drew for doing all that. And you want to tell them, since you grabbed?
Yeah, absolutely. So like Gordon said, pulled most of these samples yesterday and a couple of weeks of no rain, and that was quite the job. But this one probably doesn't need much description. Everybody's seen this. This is just red clay on the edge of the field. Over here we have sun hemp, and I believe that was sorghum in there. This was planted last fall by a producer in southern Greenville County. I had to cut some of it off, or it would have been 5 feet high, but it's been there since the springtime. Over here we just have, this was the field edge border right here, and this is just some fescue that's been there for probably 10 years. They keep it mowed on a regular basis. It's just a mixture of just whatever came up there, mostly fescue in there though. Now these two samples right here are identical. The only difference was a cover crop was planted on this that obviously wasn't very successful. So these are two kind of poor ground samples. So the only difference between this ground and this ground, they're right beside each other, is we put some straw just to show you what straw on the ground and what a different management practice and how the water will interact with that. So when we turn this on, these two down here, you'll just notice that the only difference is just the straw. So we've got a variety of different uses. We can use this in row crops, pasture settings, just about. I mean, where else can we use it, Gordon?
Yeah,
even lawn care. I mean, we've gone to a couple different events where they were talking about lawn care, and we just did the difference between mulch, good fescue cover, and poor ground. So it's a really good demonstration for how water interacts with the soil with different management practices.
So each pan has holes in the bottom to collect the water that goes through the soil, and then obviously the front ones here with these screens. Got a funnel here, and the shield on top keeps the spray from the nozzle from going into the jar. Yes, ma'am.
You said it's going to simulate the pressure of regular rain. Is that like a regular rain or this year's rain? This year's rain has been dry or a storm falling out.
Right, yeah.
And you can't get out of the way fast enough.
That's right. Yeah, so I didn't do the calculations, but I would say normal rain. Obviously, you get, an inch an hour hard rain. But I think either way it's going to demonstrate. Obviously, the harder the rain, the more erosion we run into. We actually get people say the other way around. Say, well, that's too hard. That's not real rain. But
Not this year.
I say the same thing. You know, we have had some very hard and fast rain. We don't get the old all-night drizzle anymore. I call it. It's been either all or nothing. So, without further ado, you think we just shut this thing on?
Yeah, let's crank it up before the rain comes.
Yeah.
I got smart. I got all this stuff way away from me so I don't get wet.
We might want to back up.
Yeah.
While it's running, just earlier I asked about golf courses, and our agency has spent a lot of time and effort trying to vegetate pastures and crop fields, and in a conservation plan, a lot of times we'll plant pastures, and we'll call it good. As long as you got grass on the ground, there's obviously not going to be much erosion. And so through doing this, we have actually had to rethink some of that. It has a lot to do with how you manage the height of the grass. Just because it's in grass doesn't necessarily mean that it's gonna stop all your erosion.
Oh yeah.
One other comment I heard in the room earlier is there's not a lot of runoff, and believe it or not, does anybody know how much the width of a dime, the thickness of a dime over an acre? Does anybody know how much soil that would be that's lost off of that? 5 tons per acre. So just the thickness of a dime over an acre of land, about the size of a football field, is 5 tons. That's half of a truckload. So while it may not say, and I'm guilty of this because I live in the coastal plain, real flat, and if you ask the farmers, they'll say, well, we don't have a lot of erosion. And I'll show you some pictures earlier that even, or when we get inside, but even in the sands where we are in the coastal plain, you can have quite a bit of erosion.
How long does it run?
We'll just give it a few more minutes. We
usually give it a couple inches. Probably let it run another 3 minutes or so.
Seen some big differences, that's for sure.
Gordon, you tell me what this looks like up front. Get it all.
What's the number 2 one again?
Straw.
From the left.
From the left.
Yeah.
So that's sun hemp and
millet. So that ground was probably prepped this spring, and
it was prepped this spring. So it's been it's a traditionally tilled field, and they just put some cover on it for the first time this year, this past spring.
And then number 3 is
Number 3 would be,
the cover.
that's just a field border fescue that they had, just a little buffer strip.
How long's it been there?
It's been there for years, as long as I know, so 15 years probably, and they mow it a few times a year.
One of the issues is in conventional till, and we talked about no-till earlier too, but is we can prep this ground, but the problem is we do get that big spring rain right after we've got everything tilled up, and you can see we can have quite a bit of runoff. So these outside jars are the runoff jars, and Drew and I'll grab these ones from the back.
Here, we can just take them. Yeah. So everything we're sending out in front right here is your own infiltration, what actually went into your soil profile.
you can.
I got these are all from underneath right here. These three.
So the front jar is going to be runoff. The back.
Yep.
Right there. It's going to be what went in the ground. So all my life, I grew up on a farm. We did a lot of tillage, and it was to prep the ground for seed, get seed to soil contact. And so the ground's all fluffed up, and naturally, my dad would say, you know, it helps dry out the ground to get it planted. And also, you know, when we do get a rain, it soaks up that water because it's fluffy. But what happened here? Why don't we have water? This was, you know, plowed ground. When we get a heavy rain, why don't we have water going into the ground?
What's
This is-
compact?
This is a jar from underneath.
Compact.
That's part of it from what
Yeah. Any other ideas?
The soil's just lost its infiltration capacity.
Okay, so what tillage does, I call it false porosity. We till it up. It is very porous. And you can walk out on a field, it's real fluffy. What happens is you get a rain event and it starts to pack that ground back down. And so while you had a lot of pore space in there initially, after every rain, you're packing that ground further and further back down. So what ends up happening is the first rain event you get, it probably soaks up a lot of it. And then after time goes on, it starts to get more and more runoff from the top. Because just what you said about it packing, without even our foot traffic, if you're a vegetable farmer, you got a lot of traffic going in and out for harvest, you're packing that ground. But also, just from our 50, we get average precip of 45 to 50 inches of rain. Just that rainfall packs that ground back down. So over time, these pore spaces that were there have collapsed. And so you're right with compaction, but not just necessarily human traffic. It could be just from natural rainfall compaction.
Hey Gordon, let me add something to that. From a soil side as well, and speaking to the compaction, is obviously our soils up here are heavily clay-based. Well, clay is your smallest particle size of your three particles that make up soil. And so you get a glazing effect. When that rain hits, those little small clay particles will start to fill in all your pore spaces in your soil. And so if you get a good heavy hard rain on a freshly tilled clay-based soil, then you are going to get initial infiltration, but sooner or later those clay particles will fill in those pore spaces, and you're going to get a glazing effect, and it's just going to start running right off the front, just like you saw there.
So also when we plant these fields, a lot of times we're putting out fertilizer, getting ready, or during the season we're putting fertilizer out on top. So when that water runs off, we need that fertilizer to go in the ground. What I like to say is, you know, if the fertilizer's in the ditch, you know, you spend, just say $10,000 for easy math on your fertilizer. You know, you've got this situation, you've got half of that, you should just shred that cash because it didn't get into that ground profile, it ran off. And just looking at these other jars, this fescue, somebody asked how long it had been there. Any ideas? Look at the runoff on the fescue patch versus what went in the ground.
And the clarity of the water that did run off, I mean, that's good clean water. There's not a whole lot of soil particles in that runoff right there.
Any ideas on why this one had so much infiltration?
Better root system opened it up.
Root mass. What else?
Surface area?
Okay. The surface certainly had an effect because that grass slowed that raindrop or the nozzle impact down, and it was able to soak that rain in. Same way with Drew showed you these two on the side. Same thing, just different treatment. We put more mulch on top. We mulch our gardens, or we mulch the field after we get done, versus no mulch. And look at the difference in the infiltration and versus the runoff there. We're helping the soil by putting some cover on, slowing that water down, getting it to go into the profile.
Those two samples were literally 3 feet away from each other. The only thing I did when I got here is I took a handful of straw and I placed it on top right there. So that is the only management practice I did to that. So just a little bit of straw makes that much difference.
And one thing I like to tell farmers too is if you have compaction problems, you think you have a compaction problem in your pastures or any, is you probably got a root problem. You know, overgrazing. We didn't have a overgrazed sample in here, but a lot of times, believe it or not, the overgrazed sample will perform much like this one here, where you have a lot of runoff, and those cows are defecating and urinating on the surface. You get that hard rain, it just washes a lot of that stuff in, and that's what I was telling you earlier. I used to think that if it was grass, then there was no resource concern there. But we have other models, computer models that we use, and we can actually mimic that situation, and we do see a fair amount of runoff just on overgrazed pasture situations. So one thing we like to encourage producers to do is to let their grass rest. It goes back to rotational grazing, where you can develop that root system and let that water go down into your pastures. We've had growers all over the U.S. really that have changed their grazing practices, and those old ponds that used to be down there the cows would water out of, all of a sudden they started drying up. And what was happening was those ponds were based on a drainage area off of a continuous graze like this parking lot system, and that would collect all that water, and they would have water for cows. But once they changed the grazing management, that rainfall that was falling out there in the pasture, instead of running down into the pond, it was staying in the pasture and it was running down into the ground. So by changing the way, what we want to leave here with is just because you're doing things a certain way doesn't mean you can't change. And you can have an impact one way or the other, positive or negative, as to how the water actually moves down into the soil. This particular producer will be better off in a drought situation. Because sometimes if you ride around when it starts to get dry and you see one person's pasture or the roadside may be still green, whereas the overgrazed pasture is real brown, there's no different rainfall. One pasture is across the road from the other one. The difference is one of them doesn't have a root system, and one of them collected the rain that fell, the other one didn't. So farmers, we like to talk, say, how much rain did you get? Oh, I got 1 inch of rain. Well, some people got 1 inch. This gal got 1 inch in the ground. This guy got 1 inch, but most of his went in the ditch. So you're getting the same amount of rainfall, same irrigation, but not the same amount. So there's a word for that. It's called infiltration, how that water moves down through the profile. We want the water to move down, not off the field. And so start thinking about that when you say, how much rain did you get? I got 2 inches. Well, depending on your neighbor's management, maybe he or she didn't get all that rain that they think they got. So we try to encourage people to manage land in a way that not only cuts down on sediment, but they can maximize the land use that they do have. Cut down on wasting money on fertilizers. Cut down on having better grazing. So it's an economic impact as much as it is an environmental impact. And the reality is, if the farmer can't see the dollars and how it helps them in their operation, conservation is great, but it's got to be able to make sense financially for them to stay in business. So what we try to do is encourage that too. This is just one of those demonstrations. Anybody got any questions or comments?
Subsoiling, with the contour of the field. Say something about that. Subsoiling in the 24-inch, 18 inches deep.
Right.
What you're thinking on that toward improving the quality of the rain and utilizing what rain you do get, improving the grass.
Right. So we do a lot of subsoiling in coastal plain too, in sandy land. Subsoiling is like this situation. Initially, it's great. Over time, it's going to pack itself back. But definitely contouring that subsoil furrow is much better. It actually can help some runoff because you've got a channel there, so to speak, every so often down that slope. So when that water does move across it, it hopefully goes down in those crevices that you created with the subsoil. But it's not a permanent fix. It's going to be an annual or biannual situation. What we're trying to get folks to move into is situations with using roots to try to eliminate a lot of that deep tillage. So subsoiling is a quick fix, and actually when I have producers that have pastures that are compacted, I'll say, yes, you need to rip the land initially, but to keep that land loose, we need to change your management on your grass. If you fix it with a subsoiler initially and don't change anything, it's going to be right back where it was in a year. Usually those subsoil furrows will collapse back. Again, with our 50 inches of rain, they're going to collapse back at the end of a year. It doesn't last much more than a year.
Now, when you were saying across the top of an acre, so this is compared to the whole acre covered in that. What if you have a combination of the plowed and you have good bufferage around the plowed? then what's that gonna look like?
So
So it's a combo.
correct. So, you know, plastic. If you have this situation with plasticulture, obviously you've got a certain percentage of that, probably 40% of that field area is covered. So you could eliminate that number from your erosion. And when we do models, we do that. So if we said that field is eroding at 5 tons per acre, half of it's covered. That's only 2.5 tons. Yes, that has an effect. I live near Shaw Air Force Base, so we just keep going.
But I'm talking about the buffer zones around also. So you have plasticulture, then you have buffer zones, you also have built up mounds. So now what's it looking like?
So buffers are basically what I call a diaper. You know, you're not stopping what's occurring on top, but you are, what's occurring on top is still going on. But that buffer is starting to collect some of that, filter it out. Over time, that buffer is going to fill up. You know, you still got let's just use 5 tons in this case. You still got the 5 tons coming off, but over time it starts to fill up that buffer. So buffers are good, but again, filter strips on side slopes, maybe breaking that up along the slope, putting in a filter strip along the slope as opposed to one down there at the bottom. But all that helps. It's still, as you can see, this has got grass on it, but it's still got some, runoff. It's not perfect, but it's better than it was, so to speak. So that's what we do is we work with farmers to try to come up with what's best for their system. You know, we used to do a lot of terraces, and that helps.